Hello, good afternoon. Hi. So I'm not actually arguing that we should send the children to school, but can everyone hear me? Is that right? Okay. But I don't see I don't like what I see, which is an increasing push to get children into formal education earlier and earlier. I'm starting to feel that the world is going mad, and so I've decided to speak about that today. Okay, so I've got to move between my notes here and my PowerPoint there. Well, actually, Christian just introduced me a little bit, but just to give you a bit of personal background, I like the Everest window glazing salesman that sells himself his own double glazing. I started with my interest in home education before I had any children, and by the time I'd started to carry out the research, I actually had a first child, and so it was fairly natural then that child would be home educated as my own personal experiment. But I was already involved in home education research, having read an article before I'd even got married that was said, the article was called, "Is it legal?" And I thought, my God, what a stupid question. Who would ask if it's legal? If I don't want to send my child to school, I just wouldn't send my child. Why would I ask anybody, is it legal? And it made me think, then later I was speaking to a lady I thought was a librarian in a university about PhDs, and she said, would you like to do a PhD? And I said, well, not really, but I suppose home education is something I'd read this article about. Anyway, she turned out to be head of research degrees at Durham University, and she wasn't the librarian, and she said, come to my office tomorrow. And then before I knew it, I was doing a PhD in home education, and before I knew it, I had children as well, and now I have 4. So as I was doing my PhD, I had my own little experiment going at home, and then a second child, and the first child was home educated until she was 13, when I moved to Switzerland, and she decided to give school a try. So that's also been our own little experiment, a home educated child with no German, starting school for the very first time in German in a village mountain school. And my philosophy, my husband he wasn't particularly keen on home education, but he said, I'd like my children in the school at 7. And so when I moved to Switzerland, the area where I now live, school starts in the 8th year. And so that fitted with, he died by then, but that fitted well with his philosophy. So the following 3 children started school in their 8th year. So that's also been interesting, the idea of later school starting age. So I feel that I've had quite a broad band of experience with education and different starting ages, home education, school education. So, and I now continue to work although I live in Switzerland, I continue to work as an expert witness in the courts in England, and I work in cases where any case where home education is a factor, and when it's very difficult, then I'll be called in, but I only deal with court cases. So the later, the better. Where I live in Switzerland, they're about to bring in compulsory kindergarten. So this will be the first time that children will actually start school at 4, effectively start school at 4. And it just seems, boggles my mind that the Swiss, who we all think of as having a high level of education, having been so successful, having children going into school at the 8th year, would suddenly want to put them into school at 4. You know, if it works, if it works, why? How does it go? If it isn't broken, why mend it? That's it. And they cite studies coming from England, and you think, oh my God, are you stupid? You know, look at English society. Why why copy them? And now your Norwegians are doing the same thing. I think, I don't know. Anyway, so to the UK. Compulsion was introduced in 1880 in the United Kingdom, and was said to be responsible for, can you see that? Yeah. For raising the level of education. However, studies from the United States showed that even before compulsion, the majority of children were already obtaining a level of schooling equal to or greater than what was later going to be specified by the law. Sorry, I've got to get my thing. What was really happening, it seems, in the United Kingdom was that the standard of living was increasing, affluence was increasing, and more and more parents were increasingly putting their children through education earlier. So in fact, they didn't need the compulsion. But it was easy enough for people later to say that compulsion had been the reason for the increase in education. But population was increasing as well. So it was a natural move towards families wanting their children to achieve high levels of education. I can hear a lot of banging. Can you hear banging when I speak? It's very disturbing.
If you just don't speak straight into the microphone,
right.
It's the wind from your mouth that's hitting the microphone. It doesn't have a cushion on it. So you can speak close to it, but just not right directly into it.
Right. Okay, so I'll try that. So, stemming from that, we've got the idea of compulsory school has crept in, and that somehow early schooling has become necessary. Now today in England, the phrase compulsory school age is used, and what it does is it makes people believe the lie, because schooling's not compulsory. But everybody talks about the phrase compulsory school age, which of course leads people to believe that school is compulsory. So it's interesting the way just the use of they didn't actually need to legislate to make schooling compulsory. You just introduce a phrase and then people just accept it. And that I find that concept's really interesting, that just the power of word and phraseology seems to sort of, I don't know, put a wall in front of people. They stop thinking because they start to accept the compulsory school age. So, having come to believe that education and schooling are synonymous, parents accept, almost without question, the right state to impose the curriculum. For this to have happened, as I say, with the phraseology, you can't just blame the politicians and the state. There has to have been collusion from the parents. And I think the modern world has made us passive, and parents have become increasingly to a state where they accept that the state does the work for them. So I do blame the parents. Lethargy on the part of parents that allows the state to impose what we do to our children, and do it earlier and earlier. So in England we have, is that English? In loco parentis. The state in loco parentis, we see it increasingly. So quite slowly, almost without us having noticed, the state has taken over our children and their childhood. This has happened gradually, surreptitiously, hidden under tags, which I don't like personally, tags opportunities for women in the workplace. And of course, once you've got women going into the workplace, what you need is childcare. So parents help the state. It is definitely, it's a circle, isn't it, of one leading to the other. The lure of early childcare, the mother thinks she's got to go to the workplace, they need more possessions, they think they need more money, and I don't know, I'm a little bit perhaps dark in thinking that this is some kind of plot by the state to take our children away. And it works very well. Women do believe that their place is often in the workplace rather than with children. The realization of the economic community and immigration have permitted the state to propose childcare policies. I see this a lot in Switzerland, because before mass immigration in Switzerland, there's really no culture of early childcare or kindergarten. But because of immigration, when you say, why have the children got to go to school now at 4? They say, to help people integrate. I would say, well, they could integrate very well at the playground, couldn't they? If they all met at the playground, they could do their integrating there. If the integration actually's got a little bit madder, because 2 years ago, I started getting letters from the school that came in English. And I rang up the council and I said, why are my letters coming in English? And they said, oh, it's a policy now that everybody will get letters in their own language. And I said, but before, when I didn't understand German, I would go to the school to ask for help with the translation because I didn't understand it. Now I don't have to get out of the house, do I? And they said, yes, but this will help you integrate. I said, well, it's not going to, is it? And I used to, when I couldn't speak German, I used to go to the bank because I thought the bank, this small village, he's got nothing to do, but he can help me translate letters from the school. Give him something to do. But of course, thanks to integration, I no longer have to go. Actually, I speak German now, so. So opportunities designed to be inclusive, but in fact are separatist. But after a while, they become the status quo. So increase, alongside this, sort of using integration to take our children away from us. And then it's not just the immigrants that do it, it's then everybody thinks it's normal. Once you've got the early childcare, everybody thinks it's free. The same with early from the 1880s when they wanted to when they made education compulsory. And once it was free, people took their children, people who were paying, took their children out of the paying schools and put them into the free schools. And then everyone's saying, oh, look, schooling for everybody is working very well because the take-up. But actually, they just moved from paying to free because it was free. And the same now with early childcare. It's there. It's free. Why not take it up? Then, alongside this, we've got the growing, the increase of problems in children, ADHD, more diagnosis. And I personally feel that that's another attempt to shave family life away because then children are being drugged. To take Ritalin, there's been an increase, I think it's almost doubled between 2004 and 2010 in England, the use of Ritalin, the drugging of children. But what it does is make the parents think that they're not responsible for the children because you've got something wrong with the child's got the problem. So we as parents, we're passive. That's not my problem, I can send my child to the doctor. It's just another way that the state is able to intervene. But we parents, we're complicit with it. I'm afraid I don't really, these days, I don't know if home education is going to explode. I don't know, it just seems to be going the other way totally. But it is because of passivity on our part. I feel that common sense has flown out the window. The government's been able, without much opposition, to increase the hours and years that children spend in state institutions. Parents have made them to feel increasingly that their input into raising their children is of less value than that provided by schools and the state. There are attempts by schools and state education, to make the parents feel that they're involved with homeschool contracts. But actually, nobody really listens to the parents. There's not, in state school, I don't know how it is here, but in England, I see in Switzerland, nobody's really interested in what the parents have got to say. They pretend, but they're not really listening. Parents, the value of parents for a school is that they bring children. So you need to be nice to them a little bit because you need the children. Once you've got children, you've got a whole industry, huge industry being built around. And of course, early childcare allows that industry to grow even bigger and more powerful. And then what we're looking at is the power of huge multinationals behind education. It's a huge industry. They can't afford to let us have our own children back. It's almost going too far. Once the state is taking over children earlier and earlier, and it's not about love. It's about money. The latest education plan in the United Kingdom, the 5-year education business plan, I like that, is to increase places for 2-year-olds. It won't be long before they just take them away at birth. They already do. Okay, well, I do deal with ones that get taken away at birth, actually, so it's not that fun. Passive parents, what have I said there? So, an educationist called West in England warned if too much compulsion is enforced, the danger is of large-scale parental rebellion, and the law is then brought into disrepute. Actually, he was very optimistic because you don't need compulsion because your parents are being complicit as well. They're persuaded by their own willingness to believe in state education, even when they're faced with logic to the contrary. You know that your children, you can do well for your children, but you come to believe that you have no confidence, that you're not capable, because everyone's sending their children to childcare. You just do it too. I didn't actually, but you know what I mean. In England, we've had some amazing, I really like this, a UK Member of Parliament saying, giving young children the idea that they will learn more outside the classroom than in it is a desperately dangerous notion. And then Education Secretary in 1999, Blunkett, can't remember his name, David Blunkett, that's it, at a Labour Party conference, a child not in lessons is a child not learning. But these statements fly in the face of the clear evidence that children do learn a great deal without going to school. We've all witnessed children moving through Piagetian, I like him because he's Swiss, of course, Piagetian stages of learning to walk and talk and do all the things they do without going to school to be taught them. But nevertheless, parents ask with conviction, how will my child learn if he doesn't go to school? Well, people say that to me all the time. And you think, oh my God, I don't know. Common sense answer is to point at the innate motivation to learn. Humans are innately programmed to learn. It's very difficult to stop a child wanting to learn.
Just put them to school.
Sorry?
Just put them to school.
Yes. So my favourite, it's even happened to me, actually I'd heard people talking about this question from children, but then my own son put it to me, why is the sky blue, Mummy? And I was saying to somebody, I don't actually know why the sky's blue, actually. And they said, don't worry, as soon as he goes to school, he'll stop asking all those questions. But what worries me is that once the first generation of parents are hoodwinked into belief in the state, perhaps victims of their own desire to be powerless, passivity being one of the benefits of modern life, I blame television, of course, it becomes easier to hoodwink the next generation. I note Thomas gave us that model of parents with degrees and those without degrees, and their children at the end who will go to, how many of their children will end up at university. But actually the next generation in England, they're all going to have degrees, because you can have a degree in anything in England. They want everybody to have a degree. So then parents, it's like the big lie, isn't it? Because you start to believe you can have a degree because you can tie a shoelace. That's the way it is in England anyway. And yes, the big education lie. I personally like Ayn Rand. Is everyone familiar with Ayn Rand? Completely. A Russian who went to live in America, who wrote a couple of very powerful novels. She believes that selfishness and individuality are good, and that altruism doesn't really exist, because the road to altruism would be through selfishness. But altruism for the sake of altruism is non-existence. And that does link into education, because we start to believe sort of education is good for itself, and we shouldn't be selfishly thinking about ourselves and our own children for the common good. You know, mass education is a common good. And, well, I would send everybody to go and read some Ayn Rand. We live increasingly in, can I say these words, mediocrity, when what we need is a meritocracy. So in our quest to be equal, we risk losing innovation and individuality. These facets of ourselves that emerge over time from early infancy, these are aspects of ourselves that emerge as we explore the world around us from the security and the safety of our family. So I remember when I was doing my PhD, and I pointed out to my supervisor that a great many home educators breastfeed. He said, "You can't put that in your PhD. You'll never get your doctorate if we talk about breasts and breastfeeding." But what it is, it's about the power of love. So there's been a wealth of information concerning the importance of parental involvement, which I take to be love as well, in children's development. Desforge and Albushaw in 2003 carried out a meta-analysis of 14 studies and found that parental involvement in the form of at-home good parenting has a significant positive effect on children's achievement and adjustment, even after all other factors shaping attainment have been taken out of the equation. I'm certainly somebody that will say and have said and written, it doesn't matter whether you send your children to school or you home educate. What matters is how much love you give your children and the commitment. In England, the Family and Parenting Institute further supports this by saying it's now well evidenced that the home learning environment is more influential in determining children's outcomes than parental occupation, education, or income. Further, the Children's Society found a child's relationship with their parents is pivotal in them achieving a good childhood. And Silver et al., Kathy Silver, she's one of the leading voices in sending children to school earlier and earlier and earlier. But actually, her own research describes a parenting style as what makes the greatest contribution to children's attainment, that is, that of the involved parent. Input can be as little as just being there for the child, answering or helping to answer questions as they arise, and facilitating the resources and activities. Professor Layard from the London School of Economics has written about the economic value of happiness. Well, I found, that's one of my findings, that home educated children are happy. So you don't have to have the test results. The economical benefits of happiness are established from the London School of Economics, no less. So your happy children will do well. They don't need to do well in their test results. But over life, a lifespan, we can expect them to do well. I'm going to just skip a bit. There's been a huge amount of research coming out of the United Kingdom over the years, but a lot of it's sort of swept out of under the carpet a little bit, because it doesn't, although they're quite often, they've been government-funded studies, the idea of parental involvement as such a pivotal factor is not a very popular idea, because, of course, why would we want to send them to school at 2 if we knew that really that the parents were going to be making such a big difference? Alan Thomas has said, is everyone familiar with Alan Thomas? He's sort of Australian English researcher who's been looking at home education for a number of years. So the best support for the proposal that school-age children can go on learning as they did in infancy comes from those parents who, when their children reach school age, just going on doing what they were already doing. These parents are simply continuing their children's apprenticeship into the culture. So then, still on. The big question is why? Why, when it's well established that parental involvement is the most important factor in a child's development, why are there so many attempts by the state to elbow them out of the picture altogether? Surely if parental input is so strong, the state would be offering to pay parents to stay at home and take over their children's early years education. I don't know, I'm not very good with numbers, but I just think it would be cost effective, wouldn't it? Or would it? I don't know. To persuade parents, one parent, to stay at home with the children. If we were looking at what was best for the children, that's what we would do, isn't it? If we know that parental input is the most pivotal factor, wouldn't you want then to create a system, a state system that supported at least the equivalent of one parent per family staying with the children? And then they can all go to the playground and integrate as well. Got a huge cost saving. But I'm not an economist, so I don't quite know how it'd work. A cynic might wonder that whether it's precisely the positive contribution that parents can make that's the unspoken argument for earlier and earlier schooling. It's actually because the state doesn't want the children to do well. Someone doesn't want society to improve. But I don't know, I find that... Then I think it's to do with market forces, isn't it? It's the big businesses, it's got to be the companies, it's got to be about money. Because otherwise, why would you not want the best for your children, the best for your society? Oh, it's just a little bit about children. Am I overgoing time? Quite not. Okay. So it's not just the parents. So children are quite active in their own learning. In fact, we don't even need it's not like you need the parents to devote all their time to teaching the children, because children are nicely active. Piaget found this. Child-centered learning. The child can be the center of his own learning experience, or her own learning experience. Children learn from the inside out, and they can self-organize. Some obscure research I read about Pine, Messer and Godfrey in England was quite interesting, if I can remember it clearly enough. They were looking at what the best form of teaching, whether it was didactic teaching or what was it? Sorry, I've just got to think for a moment. They had 2 talk groups, that was it, with 2 different ways of teaching, and then a control group. The control group was of no interest to the researchers at all. They were just a control group. So the children were doing some scientific little thing about balancing, and then a week later the children were invited back to see who had learned the most from these 2 types of teaching. But actually, the control group, who had actually not been taught anything, they'd just been left in a room on their own. The children were just allowed to make the fulcrum balance. And when tested a few weeks later, they were the ones that had best remembered how to do it. Whereas the children that had been taught in the classroom with the teacher standing teaching them, they'd forgotten about it. And I thought that was a great bit of research because they weren't interested in the control group, but it was a control group that was interesting. Karmeloff-Smith, Annette Karmeloff-Smith, she's sort of a big name in England. She talks about, she worked with Piaget at some stage. She talks about incubation period. I like that. A child goes to sleep and in the morning they wake up and look much cleverer. But actually, that's what was happening with the children that were learning the balancing task on their own. They'd gone away not really thinking any more about the balancing task, but when they came back, it had somehow, their mind was whirring away in their sleep. I just think it's a great way to learn, isn't it? And if you take out the stress of, like, the school day, that little brain can relax, can't it? And it can learn. It's very difficult for a child to live in a modern society and not learn. The whole thing about reading. Children learn to read on their own if you're driving them around to the supermarket. They soon know, I don't know what supermarkets you have here, but like Asda and Tesco, it's not long before they know what those words mean. Because they're with mum and they're going, or dad, and they're going shopping. And then they crack that code on their own. And you don't need to send them to school at 4. When I went first to live in Switzerland, where school starts later, and I'd said to the teacher, what about learning to read? And do you teach them to read? And she said, well, no, of course we don't really, because when they come at 8, then it takes them a week or 2 to crack the code, doesn't it? We don't actually teach reading. We don't need to. It shouldn't anyway. Most of them got brothers and sisters, so by the time the youngest one comes, they've had exposure. And you think, well, that's quite sensible, isn't it? They're not stressing out trying to teach 4-year-olds to read. Well, they're going to now because they're just making it compulsory to go at 4. But up to now, they've not had that level of stress in education. They've not had to put that onto the children because they've accepted that children just do acquire that code breaking by themselves.
5 minutes, that's okay.
Sorry?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? Yes.
Yes, you have to eat after.
We have to eat, yes.
You can continue after the break if you...
Yes. Obviously, we're later starting school age. It's been quite interesting for me. Yes, so in England now there have been quite a few organisations springing up that are lobbying for a later school starting age. But I'm still very cynical about them as well because they're arguing for a later school starting age. But they're still saying, but of course, good quality early education is still very important. So they're not actually saying, let's start children later. It's 5 in England, and they want to move it. They want to be like the Norwegians, actually, and have it at 7, while the Norwegians are moving to make it younger. I just think that's it's hilarious, but it's dark, isn't it? It's dark and hilarious, because so the English, they create research showing that early education is good, but of course they want research funding. So if you said, can I have research funding because I want to go and look at some really nice middle-class children, you're not going to get it, are you? You get research funding because you're going to go and look at underprivileged children. That's where the money is. So you go and look at your underprivileged children and you find, well, they do benefit from some early intervention. Nobody's actually looking whether they could have supported the parents to provide a better quality. What they just do is take the children away, put them into childcare, find they do well, and then before you know it, then that's being offered to the masses as children all benefit from early intervention. And so in England, this research, which is based on poorer families, but is now said to apply to everybody, is used in, I think in Norway, I read that article, Christian sent me an article, they were talking about international studies, and I thought, oh yeah, I know which international studies they are. And in Switzerland, they want to follow international studies, because if it's international, it must be right, mustn't it? We all know that. And so the Swiss now, yes, they want to put the children where I'm my canton, they want to send the children in at 4, because international studies have said that's going to be good. Common sense, we know we've been doing it since they were 8 and we were fine, but let's make it 4 because international studies say that's going to be good. And then in Norway, so the English are saying, oh, let's copy the Norwegians and make it later. The Norwegians are saying, let's copy the English and make it sooner. And then before, well, nobody knows what they're doing after all. but the result is that the big companies are going to win because they'll have the children going in at 2 and they've got their huge investments in education. Investment in education, I'll end in that, we all know it. Investment in education is a good thing and we should all encourage it. Thank you.